Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When ex-financier Derek McRee returns from prison to reclaim his quiet lakeside cabin, he finds it transformed into a luxury retreat, and he's the trespasser. What begins as a shocking discovery spirals into a gripping battle of fraud, power, and redemption. The old truck coughed up a cloud of dust as I turned off the highway and onto the narrow mountain road that wound its way toward Barry Shores. I had been driving for hours, the kind of quiet that eats at you filling the cab. No music, no radio, just the low hum of the engine and my own thoughts grinding along with it. It had been 3 years since I last saw this place. 3 years since a set of cold steel bars clicked shut behind me and everything I'd built turned into smoke. The irony wasn't lost on me, a man who once handled millions of dollars reduced to counting every cent just to make it home. But this place, this cabin by the lake, had survived everything. The feds, the lawyers, the vultures. It was the one piece of my life that stayed mine. I could still remember buying it. Cheap wood, leaky roof, mosquitoes the size of grapes, but quiet. Real quiet. Back then, I used to drive up from Houston just to fish, drink a beer, and forget the sound of clients whining about markets. After prison, that was all I wanted again. Quiet. Maybe fix the place up, maybe plant a few vegetables, maybe finally sleep without hearing metal doors slam. I told myself this time it would just be me, the mountains, and the water. Simple, clean, honest. The first red flag came when I reached the turnoff to my road and didn't recognize it. The asphalt was new. The old wooden post that marked the entrance was gone, replaced by a shiny metal sign that read, "Welcome to Silver Bluff, a lakeside community." For a second, I thought I'd taken the wrong road, but the slope of the hill, the turn by the pine. Tree, it was right. The closer I got, the stranger it looked. Decorative streetlights lined the shoulder where there used to be nothing but dirt. Fresh gravel crunched under my tires, and I started seeing houses that didn't belong here. Modern vacation homes with wraparound decks and glass railings. This used to be quiet country. Now it looked like a brochure. When I pulled up to my property, my stomach dropped. The fence was gone, replaced with a gravel parking lot that could fit half a dozen cars. My mailbox, where I used to get fishing magazines and nothing else, was gone too. In its place stood a polished wooden post with a hanging sign, "The Shore View Retreat. Boutique Lakefront Experience, $160 per night." I sat there for a full minute, engine idling, just staring. 2 tourists in matching windbreakers were sitting on my front porch drinking coffee out of branded mugs that said Shoreview. One of them waved at me like I was the maintenance guy. My porch, my lake view, my goddamn house. I got out of the truck, every step heavy. The smell of fresh paint and overpriced coffee filled the air. When I reached the porch, the woman smiled and said, "You must be with the HOA. The manager's inside. Great place, huh?" I didn't answer. My eyes went straight to the door, brand new, with a digital keypad lock I definitely hadn't installed. Through the window, I saw people moving around inside, laughing. Someone had turned my living room into a lobby. Cheap art on the walls, brochures and stands, a little counter with a coffee machine humming like it owned the place. My chest went cold. I walked around to the back, to the door I had repaired myself years ago, the one that stuck when it rained. It was still there, same wood, same handle, and it still creaked when I pushed it open. The familiar smell of cedar and lake air hit me, buried beneath layers of air freshener and cleaning products. The kitchen had been gutted and redone in some soulless, modern rustic style. Granite countertops, fake wooden beams, stainless steel everything. And standing behind the counter was a woman in her 50s with a clipboard and an attitude. "Excuse me," she said sharply, not even looking up from her phone. "This area is for staff only. Guests should stay in the lounge." I stared at her. "Staff? Lady, this is my house." She finally looked up. Her name tag read, "Cynthia Larson, Property Manager, Silver Bluff HOA." Her expression shifted from irritation to disbelief. "Your house? I think you're mistaken. This property is under management of the Silver Bluff Homeowners Association. If you're not a registered guest, I'll have to ask you to leave." I laughed once, short and dry. "You think I'm trespassing in my own kitchen? You've got some nerve." Her voice hardened. "Sir, I'm calling security." That word, security, hit me like a slap. I looked around and realized how complete the transformation was. My fishing rods were gone, my bookshelves replaced by some generic decor. My bedroom door now had a little brass plaque on it. Room 1, Lakeview Deluxe. I took a step closer, trying to keep my voice even. You don't understand. My name's Derek McCree. I own this property. I bought it in 2011, before this HOA even existed. Cynthia frowned, glancing at her tablet. That's impossible. This house is listed under Silver Bluff Cooperative Management. If you don't leave, I'll have to involve the sheriff. I looked at her, at the tourists laughing in the next room, at the sign outside, and for a second I thought maybe I was losing my mind. Maybe I'd been gone too long. Maybe this was some bureaucratic mix-up that could be cleared with a few phone calls. Then I saw a framed certificate on the wall. Silver Bluff HOA Guest Safety License, signed by someone named Karen Barkley, Vice President, my old neighbor. I felt the blood rush to my ears. Of all people, I stepped outside before I did something stupid. Cynthia followed me out onto the porch, phone in hand, snapping photos like I was some criminal breaking in. The tourists were staring now, whispering. One of them said, "Is that the guy who went to prison?" I didn't even know how they knew. I just walked to my truck, climbed in, and sat there watching my reflection in the windshield. My house was a goddamn hotel. And apparently, everyone but me thought it belonged to someone else. I didn't sleep that night. I parked my truck outside an all-night diner on the edge of Berry Shores and stared at my phone for hours, scrolling through listings, real estate databases, county records, anything that could tell me what the hell had happened. Every site told the same story. My cabin, the one I bought with my own money, was now the Shoreview Retreat, owned and operated by Silver Bluff Homeowners Association. It had a glowing 4.8 star rating, a dozen professional photos, and over 300 reviews from guests. They'd even posted a picture of my old boat dock, only now it was described as a private pier for members. I felt sick. By sunrise, I'd made up my mind. If the sheriff wanted to see paperwork, I'd show him paperwork. I drove to the county office, waited for them to open, and asked to see the property record for parcel number 431B. The clerk, a young guy who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, typed it in and printed a sheet. He frowned and read it twice. It says the property was transferred to Silver Bluff HOA in 2020 under something called a temporary management agreement. You signed it yourself. I took the page from him and my heart skipped. My name, my signature. But not my handwriting. I could tell immediately. It was too smooth, too practiced, like someone had traced it a dozen times until it looked official. Who notarized this? I asked. He squinted. A guy named R.L. Sutter, out of Mesa County. That was 200 miles away. I hadn't been within 100 of it since before prison. I thanked him and left before I started yelling. On the drive back, I called the sheriff's office. They sent the same deputy from yesterday, Clay Jenkins Local, probably been wearing that badge since the Clinton administration. He met me by the mailbox that wasn't mine anymore. I showed him the document and my original deed from 11 years ago. "You see this?" I said, jabbing the papers. "Forgery, fraud. My signature's been copied, and someone's running an illegal business out of my property." He looked over the pages slowly, chewing on his lip like he was trying to solve a crossword. "Mr. McCree, this looks official. They've got county stamps, notarization, and the HOA registry. If it's a fake, you'll need to prove it in civil court." "Civil court?" I barked. "They stole my goddamn house." He shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable. "I can't arrest someone for running a business on land that's legally listed as theirs. You gotta get yourself a lawyer. Take it up with the county judge." Behind him, the manager, Cynthia, stood on my porch, filming the whole thing on her phone. I could hear her muttering to one of the guests. "He's the ex-con I told you about. The one from Texas." I wanted to tear the phone out of her hand. Instead, I forced myself to breathe and turned back to Jenkins. "You can't seriously believe this HOA owns my land." He shrugged. "Look, man, I'm not saying what's right or wrong. I'm saying what's on paper." And that was it. He left me there, standing in the gravel, watching as 2 more cars pulled into the Shoreview parking lot. A family got out, laughing, carrying luggage past the sign that still had my address carved into it. I felt like I was watching my own life play out in someone else's movie. That evening, I sat at the public library, pulling up every listing I could find for Silver Bluff HOA. They'd expanded aggressively in the last 3 years, buying, leasing, or temporarily managing multiple lakefront properties. Their website described the area as a curated lakeside community for members and guests. Their president, Karen Barkley. I hadn't seen that name in years, but I remembered her clearly. The perfectly ironed shirts, the smug tone, the way she used to hover around my fence with a glass of Chardonnay, pretending to be helpful while asking intrusive questions. She'd once offered to handle my property taxes for me while I was in jail. I had told her to mind her own damn business. Apparently, she hadn't. I sent an email to the county registrar requesting full copies of every document filed under my parcel number. I wanted to see everything: signatures, seals, witnesses, all of it. Then I checked the hotel's booking pages again. My bedroom, the one I used to paint dark blue because I liked sleeping in near darkness, was listed as Lakeview Deluxe, Room 1, fully booked for the next 2 months. By the time I left the library, the sun was low over the lake, gold bleeding into the water. I drove past the property one last time that night. My porch light was on. Strangers were laughing, grilling, playing music. It didn't look like my home anymore. It looked like a business. And somehow, I was the outsider. I parked down the road and watched until dark. The air smelled like grilled steak and expensive cologne. I thought about how easy it would be to walk up there with a can of gasoline and end this whole charade in one bright minute. But I'd already lost one life to bad decisions. I wasn't about to burn down the second. Not yet. The next morning, I was sitting in the county records office again, this time with a notepad, a cup of burnt coffee, and the kind of rage that makes you think clearly. The clerk from yesterday gave me a thin smile when he saw me coming. "Back again, Mr. McCree?" he asked. I told him I needed certified copies of everything tied to parcel 431B. He handed me a manila folder an inch thick. Every page was neatly stamped, scanned, and filed. And there it was again, the so-called temporary transfer of management rights. A neat little paragraph saying I had voluntarily transferred my property to the Silver Bluff Homeowners Association for 6 years in lieu of outstanding community fees. The kicker: it was dated 8 months after my arrest, at a time when I was sitting in a concrete box 1,000 miles away. I stared at the signature, my name, but not my writing. The loops were too rounded, the slant wrong. Someone had practiced it. The notary seal at the bottom looked real, but I'd learned enough in prison to know how easy it was to make something look real. The clerk leaned over the counter, curious. "That's your signature, right?" he asked. "It says it was notarized in Mesa County." I didn't bother answering. Mesa County was on the other side of the state. I hadn't left New Mexico during that whole year, let alone crossed into Colorado. I spent the afternoon calling every number listed on the document. The notary's phone was disconnected. The address led to a strip mall that had burned down 2 years ago. But the HOA office? That one worked fine. The woman who answered had the kind of customer service voice that made your blood boil. Syrupy, fake, with just enough condescension to remind you that she thought you were beneath her. Silver Bluff HOA. "This is Tanya. How may I direct your call?" "I need to speak to Karen Barkley," I said. There was a pause. "May I ask who's calling?" "Tell her it's her old neighbor from Berry Shores, the one whose house she stole." The line went dead before I could finish the word stole. I called back twice. No answer. By evening, I was parked outside the HOA building, a newly built glass-fronted office that looked more like a real estate agency than a neighborhood association. Through the window, I saw her, Karen Barkley, queen of the cul-de-sac, in a navy blue blazer and pearls. She was standing in front of a group of people, gesturing at a presentation slide that said Silver Bluff Expansion Plan, Phase 2. When she saw me through the glass, her expression froze for half a second. Then she smiled that polished politician smile and turned away. I went inside anyway. The receptionist's eyes widened. "Sir, this is a private meeting," she said, stepping in front of me. "You'll need to make an appointment." "Yeah," I said. "I'll pencil that in right after I get my house back." Karen finally turned. "Mr. McCree," she said, her tone sweet and poisonous. "What a surprise. I heard you were back in town." "You heard right," I said, "and I see you've been busy turning my home into a damn resort." Her smile didn't waver. "Your former home, you mean? You signed the management transfer yourself." "Nice try, Karen. I was in prison when that paper was signed, unless you think I tunneled out for the afternoon to meet a notary." The room had gone silent. Board members glanced at each other. Karen's voice dropped, sharper now. "If you have an issue, I suggest you contact our legal department instead of harassing us at work." I took a step closer, keeping my voice steady. "You forged my signature. You're running an illegal business on private property. I'm going to prove it, and when I do, you'll be the one explaining things to a judge." Karen's smile cracked for a fraction of a second before she turned back to her audience. "Security will escort you out," she said, dismissing me like a waiter who brought the wrong drink. Two men in HOA polo shirts appeared from the hallway. They weren't armed, but they had the kind of confidence people get when they think rules protect them. I left before I did something I'd regret. That night, I drove back to the motel, still seeing that smug look on her face. I dug through my old box of documents, tax receipts, insurance forms, the original deed. Everything matched. Everything except that one forged contract. I knew now that this wasn't just theft. It was a network, a machine that had taken my absence as a green light to take everything else. I looked at the ceiling and thought about all the nights in prison when I promised myself I'd start over clean, never cross another line. But sometimes, to get justice, you've got to step right up to it. I wasn't done yet. The letter came folded inside a thick manila envelope stamped urgent legal notice. It was waiting for me at the front desk of the motel, and the moment I saw the sender, Silver Bluff Rentals, LLC, my stomach turned. Inside was a printed complaint, filed in county court. They were suing me for unlawful entry and destruction of property, totaling $18,000 in damages. According to their narrative, I had forcibly entered Room 1 of the Shoreview Retreat and caused significant distress to guests. I actually laughed out loud right there in the lobby, earning a nervous look from the kid behind the counter. It was surreal. These people had stolen my home, and now they were accusing me of trespassing in it. I drove straight to the courthouse, hoping it was a mistake, maybe a clerical glitch. No such luck. The clerk at the civil division confirmed the case was active. Worse, the judge had already issued a temporary restraining order. I was barred from coming within 200 yards of my own property, pending further review. The words felt like a punch. My own lakefront cabin was legally off limits to me, while strangers sipped coffee on the porch I'd built with my hands. Outside the courthouse, I ran into Deputy Jenkins again. He was leaning against his cruiser, coffee in hand, looking like the human version of red tape. "Heard about the injunction," he said. "Look, man, don't make it worse. Let the system handle it." I stared at him, wondering if he'd actually heard how stupid that sounded. "The system is the damn problem," I said. "The system thinks I'm a guest in my own house." He shrugged. "Then get a good lawyer." I didn't have a lawyer, not a decent one anyway, until I remembered my father's old friend, George Klein. He was retired now, pushing 70, a real estate attorney who'd seen more shady deals than the state of Colorado had mountain peaks. I found his number through a mutual acquaintance and called. He answered on the third ring, his voice gravelly and direct. "McCree, haven't heard that name in a while. Your old man still alive?" I told him no, and explained everything. Prison, the forgery, the fake contract, the lawsuit. There was a long silence. Then he said, "Jesus Christ, Derek, you can't even take a vacation without someone stealing your damn house, huh? All right. Meet me tomorrow at my office." George's office was a converted barn outside of Gunnison, lined with file cabinets and yellowing law books that probably hadn't been touched since the Bush administration. He wore suspenders and smelled faintly of tobacco and printer ink. After reading the documents, he let out a low whistle. "Well, they're bold. I'll give them that," he said. "This signature's garbage. Whoever forged it didn't bother checking the notary laws. No witness signatures, no journal entry, no recorded appearance. And this clause here, in compensation for community debts? That's laughable. You didn't owe them a damn cent." I told him about Karen, about the HOA, about the so-called rentals. He nodded slowly. "Sounds like organized fraud to me. HOA structures are easy to abuse. You get a few people in charge, a fake company or two, and suddenly they're laundering cash through Airbnbs and shell accounts." He looked up at me. "You sure you want to fight this, Derek? Once we start, it won't stop until someone goes to jail." "That's the plan," I said. He grinned, showing a row of nicotine-stained teeth. "Good. Let's make their lives miserable then." Over the next few days, we gathered evidence. I provided the original deed, tax receipts, and insurance documents. George filed a formal motion challenging the restraining order and demanded a handwriting analysis on the disputed signature. In the meantime, local gossip spread faster than wildfire. The town's Facebook group lit up with posts like, "Former convict claims HOA stole his house," and "Should ex-felons even own property near the lake?" I couldn't walk into a store without feeling eyes on my back. Late one night, I parked by the overlook above the lake, just close enough to see the faint glow of lights from my house. Music drifted faintly through the air, acoustic guitar, laughter, clinking glasses. They were probably hosting guests again. I sat there, staring down at what used to be mine, feeling a slow burn rise inside me. I'd spent 3 years living behind concrete walls for someone else's crime, and now, when I finally tried to start over, the world had found another way to lock me out. But this time, I wasn't going to stay behind the fence. George didn't waste time. Within 48 hours, he had drafted a full response to the HOA's complaint and a counterclaim that could make even the most stubborn board member sweat. He filed for a forensic handwriting analysis, a motion to suspend all rental operations tied to my property, and a demand for an emergency hearing. "We're not just going to defend you," he told me, leaning back in his squeaky chair. "We're going to bury them in paper. Bureaucracy is their religion. We'll use it against them." The handwriting analysis was our first win. George found a specialist in Denver, Dr. Laramie, an expert who'd testified in federal forgery cases. She compared the so-called management transfer signature with verified samples from my prison intake forms and IRS filings. Her report was brutal. Significant discrepancies in line pressure, angle, and loop formation consistent with forgery. She even pointed out where the forger had paused mid-stroke, an amateur mistake that screamed guilt. The best part? Her findings were admissible in court, but the notary seal was the smoking gun. George tracked down the notary listed on the document, Robert L. Sutter, except Sutter had been dead for over 2 years. His car had gone off a canyon road near Grand Junction in what the police called a single-vehicle accident. When we obtained his notary log from the state archive, the entry for the date of my supposed signature was blank. No record, no witness, no appointment. The seal had been lifted from a prior notarization and reused. That was felony territory. While George handled the legal side, I focused on digging through digital footprints. I created a fake account on Silver Bluff Rentals booking site, posing as a potential guest, and requested information about the Shoreview Retreat. Within minutes, I got an email from a generic company address. But when I checked the sender's metadata, it wasn't routed through the HOA. It came from a private Gmail account under the name Karen Barkley Properties. I grinned. Sloppy, Karen. Using some old contacts from my finance days, people who owed me favors, I traced payment processing for Silver Bluff Rentals. The rental income funneled through 2 shell companies, both registered to the same address, a P.O. box in Montrose. From there, it split into multiple smaller transfers routed to an account belonging to Barkley Family Ventures, LLC. I could almost hear George's delighted cackle when I showed him the printouts. They're laundering guest payments through an unlicensed business. God, I love stupid criminals. We also had witnesses. A maintenance worker named Ron, who serviced the docks around the lake, called me after hearing rumors about the case. "Look," he said, "I seen that Barkley lady cashing out rental envelopes right from the lodge safe. Always after hours, always alone." George got his statement notarized the next morning. We filed the counterclaim officially: forgery and falsification of property documents, illegal rental operations, conversion of private property, emotional and financial damages. By now, the small-town gossip mill had flipped. The same people who'd called me an ex-con squatter were whispering about how the HOA might have been running a scam for years. A local paper even published a short piece titled "Lakefront Rentals Under Scrutiny. Is Silver Bluff Too Slick for Its Own Good?" Karen must have read it, because the next day, I got an email. Short, venomous, and to the point. "Derek, stop this nonsense before it destroys you. You of all people should know how fragile a reputation can be." I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my coffee. She was panicking, and I'd barely started. George had one more ace up his sleeve. "You mentioned the Airbnb listings," he said one afternoon, adjusting his glasses. "Let's subpoena their transaction history. If they've been running this place over 300 nights a year, that's not a managed property. That's an unlicensed hotel. They'll owe the state a fortune in unpaid taxes." By the time the first hearing date was announced, our evidence pile could have filled a small truck. The judge granted our request to suspend all short-term rentals on the property pending investigation. For the first time in months, my house went dark again. No porch lights, no music, no laughter from tourists. It was quiet. And God, that silence felt like oxygen. That night, as I sat by the lake watching the reflection of my darkened house ripple across the water, George called. "We've got them cornered," he said. "The next move is theirs. And when they make it, we'll be ready." I hung up and smiled into the cold mountain air. For the first time since walking out of prison, I didn't feel like I was rebuilding my life. I was reclaiming it. It started with a headline: Former inmate accuses HOA of lakefront fraud, county launches inquiry. It was printed in the Gunnison Gazette, a small-town paper that usually only covered fishing tournaments and bake sales. The author was a reporter named Lindsay Hayes. I had no idea who she was until she called me directly 2 days later, saying she wanted to hear my side before the spin doctors bury it. Her voice was sharp, confident, and a little too curious. I agreed to meet her at a diner near the courthouse where the coffee tasted like regret and the pancakes could stop a heart. Lindsay didn't waste time on pleasantries. She opened her laptop, pulled up half a dozen property records, and said, "Your case isn't unique. I've found 3 other homeowners around the lake with identical temporary transfer contracts, all signed during the same year you were incarcerated, all notarized by the same dead guy." I stared at her. "You sure?" She turned the screen toward me, and there it was. The same seal, same phrasing, different names. My stomach twisted. "They built an empire," she said quietly. "And your house was just the start." George loved her instantly. "A journalist is free publicity for the truth," he said. I wasn't so sure, but it didn't matter. Once the article hit print, things snowballed. The county's district attorney called George's office for a meeting. Within a week, an official task force was formed to investigate the Silver Bluff HOA for fraud, forgery, and illegal real estate activity. The FBI didn't show up yet, but you could smell their interest in the air. Karen naturally went on the defensive. She gave her own interview to the Gazette, calling me a disgruntled ex-con with a vendetta and claiming I'd fabricated documents to extort money from hard-working community members. She even brought up my old arrest, the $3 million in counterfeit cash, the court case, the early release. The smear worked on some locals. I got a few death stares at the grocery store. One guy called me a parasite with a pity story, but I'd survived worse than gossip. And George reminded me, when liars shout, it's because they're running out of lies. Then came the first crack in her wall, Cynthia Larson, the so-called property manager. She'd been subpoenaed for questioning, and the moment she sat in front of investigators, her composure melted. Lindsay managed to get a copy of her statement. Cynthia admitted that she'd been instructed to list my house as community-managed property by Karen herself. She claimed she thought it was legal because the board had shown her signed paperwork, the forged contract. When asked about the rental cash, she hesitated, then said some of it had been redirected for maintenance funds. The investigators later found those funds deposited into Barkley Family Ventures. 2 days later, the Silver Bluff HOA office was raided by county police and federal tax agents. I was there, not inside, but parked across the street, watching through my windshield as officers carried out boxes of files and computers. Karen arrived mid-raid, heels clicking on the pavement, demanding to speak with someone in charge. The officers ignored her. One of them even handed her a warrant, and the look on her face was worth every sleepless night I'd had. When she realized Lindsay's camera crew was filming, she tried to act composed, like it was all a misunderstanding. But her voice shook when she said, "Our HOA operates with full transparency." A week later, transparency turned into panic. George received word that Karen and several board members had quietly transferred HOA funds into offshore accounts. The DA froze all assets linked to Silver Bluff Rentals and Barkley Family Ventures. Then they came for the properties themselves, mine included. Every short-term rental under their name was sealed off pending investigation. Tourists were refunded, bookings canceled, locks changed. I thought I'd feel relief, but what I felt was something colder. Anticipation. Karen wasn't the kind of woman to go quietly. When someone like her lost control, she got dangerous. Sure enough, one evening around dusk as I was leaving George's office, a car followed me down the highway. It stayed on my tail for 10 miles until I pulled into a gas station. I caught a glimpse of the driver. Karen's nephew, the same one registered as owner of the fake rental company. He watched me from the pump smirking before driving off without buying a drop of gas. Message received. When I told George, he just sighed. "She's rattled. Desperate people make sloppy mistakes. Let her hang herself." By the end of the month, the DA officially charged the Silver Bluff HOA with fraud, forgery, and racketeering. Karen was arrested at her office, on camera of course, still wearing pearls and that same unshakable grin. Lindsay's photo of her being led away in cuffs ran on the front page the next day, under the headline, "HOA Queen Falls from Her Throne." For the first time in years, I didn't feel like the ex-con in someone else's story. I was the one writing it. The courthouse smelled like stale coffee and fresh paint. like every small-town courthouse in America. But that morning, it felt different. You could sense the tension, like static before a storm. The hallways were packed with reporters, neighbors, and people who suddenly claimed they'd always suspected something shady about the HOA. Karen arrived fashionably late, as if she were stepping onto a red carpet rather than into a fraud trial. Perfect hair, pearl necklace, beige suit. The only giveaway was the tremor in her hands as she adjusted her sunglasses. Behind her trailed two lawyers from Denver, both looking like they regretted being there. I sat beside George at the plaintiff's table. He was calm as always, pen tapping rhythmically against his pad. "Today's just the first blow," he muttered. "They'll try to bury the jury in jargon. We'll stick to facts. Simple, sharp, undeniable." I nodded, though my stomach was a knot of nerves and rage. The case was titled McCree v. Silver Bluff, HOA et al. A neat little line that carried 3 years of pain behind it. The DA's office handled the criminal charges, but my civil suit was consolidated with the prosecution. Karen's team argued the same nonsense from day one, that I had voluntarily signed over the property in exchange for debt forgiveness and later fabricated evidence to extort the HOA. They painted me as a desperate ex-con chasing a payday, a man still haunted by his criminal tendencies. But George was ready. He started with the forged signature. Dr. Laramie, the handwriting expert, explained her findings in detail so simple that even a sleepy juror could follow. She projected side-by-side images of the real and fake signatures, the original from my deed, the counterfeit from the management transfer. "Notice the loop inconsistency," she said. "The forger stops mid-stroke here. Genuine handwriting flows continuously." Then she dropped the bomb. This was traced from an old tax return digitally enlarged and reprinted. Amateurs always overcorrect when they trace. Karen's lawyers objected, overruled. Next came the notary record, the empty journal, the dead man's name, the reused seal. The courtroom murmured. George leaned toward the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, when someone notarizes a document, they witness the signature. In this case, our notary couldn't have witnessed a damn thing because he was 6 feet underground." That drew a few stifled laughs from the gallery. Even the judge hid a smirk behind her hand. Then came the witnesses. Ron, the dock worker, testified that he'd seen Karen taking rental envelopes directly from the lodge's safe, always in cash. Another neighbor admitted she'd been paid to leave positive reviews for the Shoreview Retreat. Cynthia Larson took the stand under subpoena, and after some trembling and stammering, confessed to following Karen's orders to alter reservation logs and hide income reports. "She said it was legal," Cynthia whispered, staring down at her hands. "She said it was for the good of the community." When George presented the Airbnb transaction data, showing more than 340 bookings and over $200,000 in untaxed revenue, the jury's faces hardened. It was no longer a civil disagreement. It was theft, clean and simple. Karen took the stand on the 4th day against her lawyer's advice. "This is all a coordinated attack," she declared, voice trembling but loud. "I was trying to improve our neighborhood. Mr. McCree abandoned his property for years. We brought life and prosperity back to it." George didn't interrupt. He let her dig. When she finally paused, he asked, "Mrs. Barkley, do you consider forging a man's name and selling nights in his home prosperity?" Her lips tightened. "I was acting within my rights as HOA president." "And whose right was it to put his bedroom on Airbnb?" she snapped. "It was community property by then. Everyone benefited." The outburst was all we needed. Her own words, her own arrogance. By the closing argument, George had woven the story into something the jury could feel, not just understand. "My client isn't here because he wants revenge," he said, his voice low but steady. "He's here because someone decided his freedom made him easy to steal from, because a piece of paper mattered more than the truth. If they can do it to him, they can do it to anyone who dares to step away for a while and trust their neighbors." When the verdict came, it was swift. Guilty on all counts, forgery, fraud, and illegal enterprise. The judge's voice echoed through the room. "This court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Mr. Derek McCree." She ordered the immediate restoration of property ownership and the freezing of all HOA accounts. Karen and 2 board members were remanded into custody pending sentencing. As the bailiff cuffed her, she turned to me. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "You think you've won, but you'll be back in a cell soon enough." I just looked at her, calm for the first time in years. "No, Karen, this time You're the one behind bars. The reporters swarmed the hallway afterward. Lindsay was waiting near the steps, notebook in hand, eyes shining. Told you it'd make the front page, she said. How's it feel to be the guy who beat an HOA? Feels like finally breathing, I said, and walked out into the sunlight. The morning after the verdict, I drove back to the lake. Mist rolled across the water, soft and white, the kind that makes everything look like a memory. For the first time in years, my house stood empty. No tourists, no music, no laughter that didn't belong there. Just quiet. The porch still smelled of cedar. Someone had left one of the old Shoreview retreat mugs on the railing, a cheap souvenir of a stolen life. I tossed it into the trash. Inside, the place felt strange, mine, yet scarred. Fresh paint over old walls, new floors over the ones I built. I walked through each room like it was a confession. The judge's order had come through that morning. Full ownership restored, damages awarded, the HOA dissolved. Karen and her board were sentenced, 14 years for fraud, forgery, and racketeering. Even her nephew got time for money laundering. George called while I was unpacking. "You did it, kid. You really did it." I told him it didn't feel like victory, just balance. He laughed. Balance is better than revenge. Lindsay's article went national that week. The man who took down an HOA. People sent letters, strangers thanking me for proving that paper doesn't outweigh truth. I never replied. A month later, a couple from Germany made an offer, $1.3 million cash, no negotiations. I didn't hesitate. I signed the deed with my real signature this time. When the ink dried, I sat on the porch one last time. The lake was calm, reflecting the mountains like glass. Somewhere in the distance, a loon called, echoing across the water. I left the key under the mat and walked to my truck. I didn't look back. I had a new place waiting, an open stretch of desert near the Grand Canyon where the wind never asked questions and nobody cared about past mistakes. As I drove away, the lake disappeared in the rearview mirror, swallowed by fog and silence. I had my freedom back, for good.